Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is my sworn duty as solicitor of this court to present to you The Backseat Designers, Episode 4. My name is Trolls, aka the Space Quest Historian, and I will be defending the following two abhorrent specimens in today's proceedings. Frederick Olsen, on the charges of speaking at the speed of paint drying, how do you plead?
Well,
moving on.
Not guilty.
Cool. Dr. Gareth Millward, on the charges of abandoning the British Empire to embark on a successful career of morphing into Yoda, how do you plead?
No, do it again.
Cool. With your office chair. We were having a chat about Gareth's impossibly old office chair that he had shipped over from the UK in bits and pieces, as it were.
Yeah, it has not survived particularly well, and if you can hear this sort of rocking back and forth, that's me. I will try to keep myself in one position and to remember to use the mute button.
Yeah, actually, speaking of shit, of creaky shit in Denmark, we should probably, not to steal your thunder, Trolls, but okay, yes, a little bit, we should probably tell the viewers why it has been so long, first and foremost. So what happened, Gareth?
What happened, Gareth?
Yeah, sorry. I'm being a very, very bad podcaster and trying to eat soup at the same time as podcast. So my landlord decided that he wasn't going to answer any letters from the broadband company saying that they were cutting off the broadband and that if he wanted to switch to the new line that they were putting into the building, that he simply needed to order a new router. He did not do this, and it managed to take him 3 to 4 weeks to replace the router. And by the time I finally had internet back, it was nearly Christmas, and we all had different plans and were going in different directions. And so I murdered him.
Yes, as you, and this is why we're on trial. Indeed,
this is a much better trial than the one you had scripted.
Well, yes, but it actually makes perfect sense, because I do believe that we were accessories to the fact in that we suggested said murder.
We may have poked and prodded a bit, yes.
Yes.
I have to say, lads, this is not a particularly good defence. I don't think you're supposed to admit it up front and then, without even being pressed, admit to being accomplices. That's not the way that this is supposed to work.
Well, we have some very, very lenient open prisons.
Yes, and also, I mean, if not to bring real-world politics into the matter, but if you can be applauded for murdering a CEO of a health company in the United States, surely we can be applauded for murdering a batshit insane landlord.
Well, you've got to start little and work your way up, I think.
To make an omelette.
That was Luigi's problem. He started far too high. There's nowhere to go after that.
Fucking hell.
I think we're going to, as soon as you start talking real world politics, that's where the edit begins, and we'll probably end it with a clap in a couple of seconds.
Libel alert.
Oh, shit. All right. Moving on. So, what have you guys been up to during this interim? Obviously, holidays and of murdering a few people on the side. What else has been going on in your lives?
I contracted pneumonia.
Cool. Was she gentle? Did she fall under Gareth's language teacher skills, or was she relatively new at the game?
Well, I don't want to make a deep throat joke, so I'm just going to ignore that question.
Yeah. How is Bettina anyway, Gareth?
I don't know, I haven't seen her in a while, but she's, last time I saw her, she cycled up to me at a crossroads, said hello in Danish, obviously, and congratulated me on passing my exams. And then as we were pulling away from the light, she just sped off into the distance, never to be seen again. Because apparently I cycle worse than a woman in her late 50s.
Was this anywhere near a major city?
It was on the outskirts of Odense, so no.
Oh, you're very, very good at pronouncing that. That's a tricky city name.
My attack.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of things that are hard to pronounce, we might as well move into today's topic, because I know Gareth is going to flex his linguistic skills at some point during these proceedings. But today's topic has nothing to do with holidays, and has nothing to do with the New Year's. It has nothing to do with murdering landlords or CEOs of anything. I'm still keeping that bit in. Fuck it. We are talking about adventure games, big surprise, but also adventure games that don't exist, and adventure games that we are kind of confused as to why they don't exist. Today's topic is what movies, books, TV shows, or anything from any other mediums have not been turned into adventure games, but would really make for very, very good adventure games. And I suppose really down-to-earth issues such as copyright licensing and stuff like that might have something to do with it, but we're just going to keep it high level, high concept, and just go, this would make a great adventure game, and just screw all the nitty-gritty stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we might as well get some of the nitty-gritty stuff, out of the way, because there are definitely some boats that have been missed. I mean, we're not the first one to ask this question, but why the hell have Lucasfilm sit on Star Wars as an intellectual property and not actually make a Star Wars adventure game when they are arguably, at one point in the 90s, kings of the genre? As Sierra drifted off to make pseudo 3D games and kind of failed at that, LucasArts had a really good run during, the tail end of the 90s. Why the hell is Yoda stories all we got that sort of fits the bill?
Well, the Star Wars license just seemed to believe that everything needed to be an RPG or some kind of space shooter. They just completely ignored the kind of the more narrative end of things, which is a bit weird given the number of novels that have been produced and various other things.
And Indiana Jones adventure games, I have to say, because you take but between the big tent poles of the Steven Spielberg Lucas collaborations, you've got your Indiana Jones and you've got your Star Wars. I suppose Steven Spielberg wasn't like totally involved in Star Wars, but anyway, that's sort of the two franchises you think, okay, LucasArts could really run with this shit. And they made two fantastic point and click adventure games for Indiana Jones in the early 90s. You've got your Last Crusade and you got your Fate of Atlantis. Absolute suddenly I'm infatuated with the word tentpole, but yeah, absolute tentpoles of the adventure game genre. And there's this new Indiana Jones game out, which has a really silly name that I forget, but everyone's just going, oh, this is like a throwback to those old graphic adventure games. They've actually gone back and done stuff that isn't absolutely terrible, like the Tomb Raider action adventure games that they started doing after Fate of Atlantis. So hey, that's something. They've got Indiana Jones adventure games. Fantastic. Star Wars is an excellent franchise that could very well work within an adventure game genre, but I guess they just sort of sort of afraid to touch it. Which is no, that's kind of strange because they had like TIE Fighter and X-Wing back in the day when they were still making adventure games, but everything Star Wars turned into Dark Forces, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it boils down to just a lack of imagination on the part of certain developers or license holders, and not considering that, hey, this might work as a narrative driven game, which I didn't mean to derail this to turn it into.
Oh shit!
Oh, Fred died.
Revenge of the Landlord.
Yeah, probably. Do you want me to keep talking, or are we going to wait for him to come back?
I don't know.
Because I don't think that it's necessarily a lack of imagination, because there were a bunch of games that were made, and some of them are very fondly thought of. It's probably more down to the fact that Star Wars did go with the more RPG shootery kind of approach. Those kind of games are the ones that you can kind of make with reused assets, right? And you can keep sort of recycling. So it may well have been that it was much cheaper and more profitable to do those other kind of games rather than an adventure game when it came to Star Wars.
Yeah, that's a bit strange, really, because the first Indiana Jones point and click, The Last Crusade, was made in a very, very short time, working off of a draft of the script that wasn't even the final draft of the script, and they just knocked that out. And you would assume, doing a Star Wars adventure games with all the established lore, you had the first trilogy made already by the time Lucasfilm Games started doing point and click adventure games. So Well,
Yeah,
I
fair
say
point.
point click. The Monkey Island Onwards secret, which is like when the LucasArts heydays started. It totally. They could have totally done that, and they didn't. If anyone is listening to this wondering where the hell Fred went, he went, and I'm trying to get him to refresh the.
I refreshed. I'm just letting you cook.
Here we are. All right, he's back, and bigger than a bread box. So you were talking about lack of imagination, and Gareth has now absolutely run that argument into the ground. But do you care to finish it?
No, because I didn't hear everything Gareth had to say, so I'm gonna assume he's right. He's got the PhD. I don't.
That's true.
Yeah, but I've completely changed my opinion already because Trolls has pointed out that they were more than willing to make adventure games of other types of things within various other series. My main point was that we know that it's cheaper to make a first person shooter in a lot of ways because you can reuse assets and things like that. But also at the same time, like, then why was there no, why were they doing narrative games in other parts of the company? So we don't know. Maybe one day we'll uncover the secret library that Lucas.
No. Libel alert. Well, not really, actually. Okay, so now we've covered the big question that I suppose everyone listening to this show was hoping that we might cover. Why isn't there no Star Wars adventure game? We don't know. It would be great. I know Stacey Davidson was working on a Star Wars adventure game that kind of looked like the old Indiana Jones Fate of Atlantis type thing. It's been in development for decades and decades. I don't know where he is with that. It looked pretty cool.
There was a fan project for a Shadows of the Empire adventure game as well, and I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but it was like a Star Wars movie without the movie. So there were games, comics, books, a soundtrack CD even, and someone tried to turn that into a point-and-click adventure game for a while. Unfortunately, it seems to be dead.
Did the mouse kill it?
I don't think so. I think what usually kills fan projects, that is real life, stepped in and killed it.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Yeah, or they take about 15 years to complete and then suddenly they appear out of nowhere, which is always entertaining.
Yes. Yeah, Fred can attest to that one. All right, so that's Star Wars. Let's move on. Who wants to go first other than Star Wars? I mean, I've got two. Fred had one or two, and Gareth had one or two. We've actually discussed this prior to recording. It's amazing, isn't it?
I can do the rickety segue since it's a sci-fi franchise, and I hope to God that it won't cut me off again. But I was researching the Doctor Who games put out because I think that franchise is absolutely perfect. Now, I'm not sure how much Gareth has watched it. Obviously it's a British national institution. Trolls is proudly unfamiliar with it.
I wouldn't say proudly.
I've been exposed to some Who.
I mean, TLDR, it's about a quote-unquote Time Lord who, by the time the show began in 1963, had been on Earth for a number of years with his granddaughter, with his spaceship hidden in this junkyard, and its chameleon circuit or whatever it's called is stuck. So it's always a blue police box. In appearance, it can basically blend in with its surroundings because the ship, the TARDIS, can travel in time and space. Early on in the series, there was like an educational aspect where they would travel to the Stone Age and, the time of Marco Polo and what have you, and do purely historical episodes. And then it moved on to this like monster of the week type thing where you would get enemies like the Cybermen, the Daleks. Did you die on me again?
No, I'm here. I'm listening intently.
We're just actually listening to you, Fred. I know it's a weird feeling.
Why are you not interrupting? God, that's so weird.
And I'm just quick interjection. I'm just fascinated that you feel the need to recap the series lore of Doctor Who to a podcast that is mainly, the listening audience is mainly into science fiction already. I think if anyone hasn't heard Doctor Who at this point.
I mean, it's never really taken off that majorly outside the UK, is my perspective. Obviously, there are American fans. It's never really taken off in Denmark. I know
that's true.
There are enclaves of fans, but it's not really a big thing. But really, my point in summarizing who the Doctor, the protagonist, is, and what the universe is all about. It's very much, he goes out or backwards in time or forwards in time or to other galaxies, to other planets, whatever, and solves problems. And I'm struggling to come up with a good reason why most of the games based on Doctor Who are action-oriented, when there is so much of an... they drop the educational aspect of the show pretty quickly, but it's about using your head, it's about the peaceful way out, it's about fixing problems. It would be absolutely perfect for an adventure game, point and click or otherwise. And I don't get why we have some pretty phenomenal Star Trek adventure games, but we've never actually seen a die-hard Doctor Who adventure game.
Another reason why Doctor Who would work really well is because, unlike Star Wars or Star Trek, the lore isn't quite as baked in. Like, Doctor Who has always been a bit all over the place.
Yes.
It's never really had a huge amount of internal consistency. There's always been things that they've been able to rewrite or redo. There's certainly very little consistency between the original run from the 60s through to the late 80s and then the reboots in the 21st century. So it's the kind of thing where you could make a completely standalone story that wouldn't ruin anything else. It would seem believable. There's a lot more leeway for a writing team to do a Doctor Who than there maybe would be in those other franchises.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is a big stretch from, the character disappearing from televisions in the late 80s to suddenly reappearing in the mid-2000s, where there has been this event known as the Great Time War, where everything apparently kind of went to shit, and the Doctor's home planet got supposedly destroyed, and he's all alone in the universe, last of his kind. There's so much wiggle room in that period of the show's lore that they actually wrote in a new incarnation of the Doctor. John Hurt got to play the character for a TV special all of a sudden, and that was like a whole new chapter. We've got this incarnation of the Doctor too, because he changes appearances every once in a while to keep the show going, to make sure that the lead character doesn't die off all of a sudden.
And that's the beauty of Doctor Who. What little knowledge I have of Doctor Who is every time one of the lead protagonist actors either gets sick of the role or for some reason don't feel like participating anymore, like they contract dementia. Excuse me. Like they have dementia or something, as I believe the first Doctor back in the 60s did. They just sort of, he just sort of dies off, and then he's reincarnated into a different actor. So you can make an adventure game. You didn't even have to get any of the established character protagonist actors to reprise the role or anything. You just have a brand new Doctor.
No, but one thing there also is just great enthusiasm. There's a whole, there's the TV show, and there's this company called Big Finish that has this whole line of audio adventures where, even if some of the past Doctors have been reluctant to reprise the role on screen, most of them are actually doing these radio play type things that you can buy on CD or stream or buy on MP3 or whatever. So there is a lot of love. One never really stops being the Doctor. Even Tom Baker, earliest man standing in his 90s, never truly stopped being the Doctor. And I think you would honestly know you don't need the Doctor in a game, but I don't think you would have any trouble getting the old crew back, honestly.
No, and certain elements of Doctor Who have passed outside of the contained realm of Whovian fandom and have now become just culturally acceptable things to spout off, like the Daleks. Everyone knows what a Dalek looks like, really, and knows the exterminate thing and all of that stuff. I mean, I'm watching this children's TV show with my son called Ben and Holly's Little Kingdom. I was just going, is it Magic Kingdom or is it Little Kingdom? No, it's Little Kingdom. There is magic in it. But anyway, one of the voice actors in that show is 90 years old, and he plays a grumpy old elf called simply the Wise Old Elf. And he was the original voice actor for the Daleks. And he doesn't do the Dalek voice, obviously, but it's just amazing that... and he was also a voice actor for the old Thundercats TV show. So they sometimes they have Thundercats references on this children's TV show. It's just amazing. Like some of those things, you could easily do a Doctor Who game that doesn't really reference much that has happened in the series, because why would you bother? But you could certainly have antagonists like the Daleks, maybe even the Cybermen, just to please the hardcore fans, I suppose, because everyone sort of knows what a Dalek looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you say, it's ingrained in culture at this point. So that's another thing, because the games that have been based on Doctor Who don't seem to be particularly successful, and I'm not sure why that is. They don't seem to be marketed a lot. I can tell you that.
No, I saw two a while ago. There was these mobile games that were sort of stealth based. Like you arrive on a planet and you're supposed to hide from shit against sort of an action adventure, kind of like Broken Sword 3 in a way. It was quite terrible, actually. And we will get back to terrible mobile games of other franchises that could have been very successful adventure games in the future of this podcast. Don't you worry. Yeah, let's park Doctor Who for a bit here, because obviously we could go on and on. Gareth, what was one of your picks?
Well, I think the stuff that I watched as a kid that I think would work quite well. I was going to say Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because I think not necessarily that you would take control of the Scooby Gang or of any of that kind of thing, but the world that is created in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I think, is a really interesting one around the Hellmouth, the different types of baddies that they have to deal with, and the reasons why those things exist. I feel like there's a real kind of world there that could be explored. And I got thinking about that because I was thinking about listening to Richard Cobbett recently on the Quest podcast. Not that I want to make you go and listen to other people's podcasts. You should be listening to this one and this one alone. But if you do happen to listen to other podcasts, Richard was talking about his love of the series Discworld, and I won't spoil his interview and the things that he talks about. But one of the things that he mentioned was that one of the things he wants from an adventure game based in another franchise is something that does something new, that isn't just fan service, isn't just, and here is that other character that you liked. Yay!
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't just something that just repeats a storyline from the show or something like that. Something that does something different in that world and captures the essence of what that world was and the way that it used to tell stories. And,
Preach.
We just ignore what Joss Whedon has become in the past 20 years or so and just try and remember the good times. I think that Joss Whedon storytelling in a Joss Whedon world would make an excellent adventure game.
I agree. And one of the good things about the Buffy the Vampire Slayer universe is that you could comfortably pull the same trick that the X-Files game did, the 7 CD one that came out, the FMV game, in that you don't have to, like you say, play any of the Scooby Gang. You don't have to play like as Buffy or as Willow or any of those shitheads. You could be the new guy on the block, and you could just walk like a transfer student to what is it, Sunnydale? Yeah, it's Sunnydale. And just basically be the new guy who has to sort of contend with oh shit, there's vampires, oh shit, there's a Hellmouth, oh god, and like run into the Scooby Gang and go, yeah, we've been around the block a few times before, kind of thing. Because like you say, the lore and the world building in that TV show was fantastic, and you definitely don't need to anchor that to the established characters necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That actually made me think not to make this blowing smoke up Joss Whedon's ass, because he needs a boot up his ass instead. But Firefly could also work fantastically as an adventure game, not least because of the dynamics between the different crew members. Even having a game simply about walking around on the ship would be interesting.
Oh hell yeah. And walking around the ship, I've always wondered why there wasn't a Futurama adventure game. There was something slightly close to it, but for some reason, every Matt Groening franchise has always ended up being pretty shit on the video game front. The Simpsons beat 'em up is regarded as a classic. Why the fuck is Marge going around beating people up with a vacuum cleaner? Anyway, if a Matt Groening franchise really would work well as an adventure game, because like it or not, Futurama is a fairly smart a fairly smart universe, and a lot of it has to do with puzzle solving rather than strength and shooting stuff and all. It occurs obviously, but the one Futurama game that did come out was a PlayStation 2 sort of jump and gun type of affair, which my wife and I actually played all the way through, and it was great fun being able to run around the Planet Express headquarters and visiting alien planets and all that stuff. And it had all the right humor because the script was written by the actual writers from the TV show, and all the voice actors reprised their roles and all that. But it just felt kind of weird to be doing platforming puzzles or platforming segments, I should say, as Fry. Although it was kind of fun, like every time you failed one of the platforming sections, he would obviously drop to the ground and die, and then he would be beamed up by the Planet Express ship and thrown into this tube of some kind, and they would reanimate his corpse, just shove him back onto the platform.
Yeah, that does sound good. One of the franchises that has done that quite well, actually, other than the latest version, is South Park, Stick of Truth and The Fractured But Whole.
Yes.
I've played those quite a lot because they do a really good job of capturing the essence of the universe. They've got the voice actors, they've got the writers in. They clearly understand what a computer game and a narrative-based computer game is, and they've definitely put the effort into making that work. It's that thing of being able to walk around the ship on Futurama, being able to walk around the town of Springfield if you're the Simpsons, or South Park in the aforementioned South Park. I think that there is something that when these things are done right, they are done so very well. But I think maybe it's just our age, but I think we remember some of those early 90s just cash grabs that had absolutely nothing to do with the original material.
Oh yeah, and South Park had a rocky road as well. I remember the first South Park game, the FPS.
Oh god, yeah, that was terrible.
God, that was terrible.
I had the racing game. I think that was a rough deal as well.
Yeah, what the fuck was up the racing game? And do you know what's really weird is that one of the most beloved Simpsons games is that fucking GTA clone they put out. Like, people, honestly to God, they love this thing. Like, it's got an active modding community to this day. I'm not knocking the game. As far as I know, it's brilliant. But why the fuck would Homer Simpson run around stealing cars and ramming them into other people?
Well, maybe that's the contrast. And I mean, that's not something we've been considering when we've been lining up these examples. We're taking something that to our minds would work extraordinarily well as adventure games. But what about the completely wrong in our eyes, maybe choices that could turn into something highly interesting, like a Simpsons hit and run game? Because I think it's that contrast that draws people in.
Yeah.
A Peppa Pig Manhunt.
God, yes. Oh God, that would be so great! Like a first-person shooter in the Peppa Pig universe, that would be great. Or like a real-time strategy game based on Neighbours, the Australian soap opera, or something like that.
Excellent.
That would be fucking amazing. Or I suppose Neighbours would lend itself to more of like a city building, SimCity or Sims-esque type. How fucking off topic do I get? Really? Yeah. Buffy the Vampire Slayer would be an excellent choice for an adventure game.
EastEnders Walking Simulator.
just the fucking dullest fucking game of all time.
Merry Christmas, Ange.
Shitting Christ. Okay, I'm gonna. There's a tangential bridge into one of my examples here, which is that the show that I'm going to talk about actually had a Neighbours spoof on it called Androids, replete with a parody of the Neighbours theme song, which is excellent. And the show I'm talking about is Red Dwarf, which is one of the my favorite shows growing up, and taught me an awful lot about not just sense of humor, but also British slang and invention of new slang, as it were. It's just an amazing TV show, and it's an amazing sense of humor, and it's also got very smart writing and also very prone to the sort of just absolutely cynically depressive snarky type of humor that Space Quest is known for. So there's kind of a connection there. And the show has numerous references to adventure games in it. I don't know if I should recap the premise of Red Dwarf the way that
I think
Frederick?
well,
I
certainly
have
the
watched
premise
it,
of-
but sorry. Oh, he's creaking to shut me up.
Yeah, you go, Fred. You go, Fred.
No, I just wanted to say it because my name was mentioned that I did watch at least the earlier episodes, but that's like more than a decade ago. So have at it.
Yeah, I think at least explaining the sort of the better than life plot line is definitely worth doing, because that is a classic.
Everyone's got their favorites, I suppose. Okay, so I actually had an idea for a style that the Red Dwarf adventure game could take. So that will tie into sort of a recap. The premise of the show is the last human being alive is stuck on a mining ship, a really decrepit old mining ship, 3 million years away from Earth, because he went into stasis. He was supposed to be in there for 3 months, and they ended up getting released after 3 million years. Something radiation. A radiation accident happened aboard the ship, killed all of the crew, and he's now the last human being alive, because 3 million years, it's pretty likely that the human race has died out by then. So his only companion aboard the ship is a resurrected hologram of his bunkmates aboard this ship. Now, these two people were the lowest ranking members of the ship. The guy that they reanimated is just slightly superior to him. He's like a step above. They're both chicken soup vending machine repairmen. And the bunkmate that was resurrected is just absurdly antagonistic, dislikes our main protagonist immensely. And the only reason the onboard computer resurrected him is because they had the most verbal interactions of anyone on the ship. But as the protagonist says, yeah, well, the only interactions we had, half of them was me telling him to fuck off, and the other half was him putting me on report for telling him to fuck off. So, and then they find a creature in the holding in the cargo bay area who has evolved from your basic domestic cat, who's now a bipedal human looking type thing, and they just call him Cat. They don't bother giving him a name. So he looks and well, he looks human, except he's got fangs, and he likes preening himself a lot. And then it's rounded out by the ship's computer that I mentioned previously, who after 3 million years has gone a bit soft in the head and is quite forgetful. And later they introduced an android character, a robot character called Crichton, who, is pretty much a robot, but one of those subservient robots that just says, yes, sir, no, sir. And the main protagonist tries to break his programming and make him more human, which is obviously futile because everyone's a complete idiot on the show. So my idea for an adventure game based on this franchise would be one of those Day of the Tentacles type things where you could switch between characters because they each have their strengths and their flaws. So the main protagonist, Dave Lister, is as a human. So he would be like your standard adventure game protagonist: pick up, use, walk to, talk to, all that shit. Then you've got his bunkmate, the hologram, the resurrected hologram, Arnold Rimmer, who, by virtue of being a hologram, cannot touch anything. He's made entirely of light. So he can't touch anything, but he's got these two robotic companions known as scutters, which is basically just an arm on a little, it's like a little Roomba with a little attached arm to it. And they rarely do what he says, but to interact with anything in the game world, he would have to tell the scutters or tell other characters what it is they're supposed to do. So it's mostly a dialogue puzzle type thing, and sort of circumventing the fact that everyone hates him. So he has to sort of sweet talk them into stuff. The cat obviously doesn't take direction very well, and for the most part just doesn't really want to be part of any of the stories. But he's by virtue of being a cat, he has an excellent sense of smell, and he's got these sort of supernatural-ish characteristics. He can climb things that the other people can't reach, squeeze into tight spaces and all that. And then you've got the robot character Crichton, who is an android, and he has all these sort of weird attachments he can put into his body. He's got like a vacuum cleaner and a blender and stuff like that. So even though he thinks of himself as subservient to all humans, he could you could pick up various items across the ship that he could use to sort of plug into his body and accomplish tasks that the other characters couldn't. That would be an interesting premise for an adventure game, I feel. God, that was a long It's a long recap.
But you made me realise how clever Red Dwarf was as as a science fiction premise, because the interaction between each of the characters is also what would make it work. I mean, the they are antagonistic towards each other, but they are all in it together, and they do usually find some way of coming together. It was a really clever show because it played on a lot of social and political issues in the 1980s around class, corporate politics, as well as just being the monster of the week or the silly sci-fi story of the week kind of show. And of course, being a British show, it ran for 10 years, and they did 4 episodes. You know how the British way of creating content tends to work. But I think that premise of being able to switch between the characters works, and having them as an ensemble cast as well is one of the things that, I think Day of the Tentacle is a really good kind of model to be using for something like that.
It would be very interesting. And what I love is that you describe the show as past tense, which I concur with entirely. And the fact is, Red Dwarf is still running.
I don't know. The Dave episodes where they are just old men bickering on a ship, that definitely speaks to me. Middle-aged to elderly British men just not getting on with each other. That speaks to me somehow, and I can't quite work out why.
There is some sort of familiarity there, but for Red Dwarf ran into a sort of two guys from Andromeda situation. They were 2 creators, and they wrote all of the episodes together, like a writing team, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor. But after series 6. And you're absolutely right. They did the British thing where each season or series, as the Brits call it, was like 6 episodes, just 6 episodes, and that was it. But after the 6th season, one of them left. Rob Grant left the team, and that was unfortunate because he was the funny one. The other guy was the one who came up with the high concept science fiction things to pin the stories on, and he was very, very good at that. But the other guy was the funny guy, and so that's why I just. After series 6, it just seems like a weak representation of itself.
I think that's definitely true of we're going on to Red Dwarf now. Sorry, everybody who's not interested in Red Dwarf. I think that's definitely true of the middling series from 7 through to I can't remember when. I mean, there was a whole reason why everything got delayed and it all fell apart. That given that he was found not guilty, we won't go into. But I think it's those middle ones are bad. But then about 5 years ago or so, they basically just forgot that they ever made those middle episodes and just went, right, these are these old men. They're on Starbug or on Red Dwarf, and they're just going around doing stuff, and it doesn't really have anything to do with anything that's come before it. So a little bit like Fred was talking about Doctor Who, actually, the fact that they're not really committed to any kind of lore is quite a good thing. I think it gives you so much freedom to do something really interesting with the franchise.
Yeah, that's interesting because there's a lot of retconning going on in Red Dwarf. They are not interested in continuity whatsoever. So you could basically just take anything. There were also 2 novelizations written that would work quite well as adventure games if you just adapted the novelizations, because they not only tell the backstory, but they also go into a lot more detail. Some of it is copied wholesale from episodes, and some of it is fleshed out immensely. Like you said, the better than life stuff. But anyway, we're not really talking about we shouldn't be talking about the series anyway. And I think I've gone on long enough. The only thing I had really was, the premise of how you could switch between the characters. I don't know what sort of story you could tell. Obviously, you could adapt the better than life, which would be absolutely fantastic because that veers off into like really freaky territory. But you guys would have to go up and look that up yourself. The one thing I would just like to pin on this, I mentioned that they had a lot of adventure game references on the show. There's in fact an entire episode where they perceive themselves as being killed, like the ship crashes, and then they wake up and realize that the entire series, the entire time they've been on Red Dwarf, was actually just a VR adventure game. And then the technician that wakes them up just berates them for not figuring out the puzzles correctly. Like, he starts giving them walkthrough hints for the things they should have been doing instead of pissing around in circles. It's just so fucking brilliant. The episode's called Back to Reality.
Well, there's your death sequence.
Yes, you wake up and get antagonized by this fucking technician. It's great.
Dwayne Dibley?
Yes, exactly. All right, let's move on. I've rambled on long enough. Back to you, Fred.
I don't have any other suggestions. That was basically it. So I'm hearing everything you're saying with regards to Red Dwarf, and I'm only not interjecting because I agree with it all.
Hey, kudos.
Well, I have another kind of Manic Mansion kind of sort of idea in terms of how the how things would work. So the first example from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the reason I mentioned that one was because I was just thinking about Richard Cobbett's talking about having a world that you can return to that doesn't necessarily have to be particularly faithful to the original material, in the sense of it doesn't have to be faithful to an original a story that's already been told, but where you're part of that world and you're part of that feeling, and it gives you the platform to tell new stories and do new things. But I think I'd like to go to the TV show that before I even arrived in this country taught me the phrase "Jeg har ondt i pikken." And that is...
You could have just asked.
And that is The Bridge, which, for those of you who don't know, is one of those Scandi noir series from the late 2000s, early 2010s, where, at least in the original series, the premise was that there was a murder, and the body was left on the bridge between Denmark and Sweden, exactly halfway along the bridge. So technically, the body was in both countries, and technically, the two police forces, one from Malmo and one from Copenhagen, would have to solve the crime together.
Yeah, that's not going to go well.
It's not going to go well. As you know, the Danes and the Swedes don't get on. The Danish guy is the parody of a Danish man, can't stay faithful to his wife, drinks too much, doesn't really care about the rules. And the Swede is the stereotypical Swedish woman, follows the rules far too much, takes far too much snooze, and generally ruins all of her social relationships because she has no sense of irony. This is Denmark and Sweden. Yep, yeah. This is what I've come to know these two countries as.
Oh, it's true. Actually, a quick interjection. One of my favorite facts about Denmark versus Sweden is we've had so many wars with Sweden that historians have lost count. This is a fact. We don't know how many wars we've had with Sweden because there's just too many of them.
There's far too many.
Yeah, we've also pulled a lot of highness shit. I mean, look up the Stockholmian bloodbath, because, there are war crimes and there are war crimes. And this is one of the latter ones.
Anyway, the cute Danish noir TV series.
The cute Danish noir TV series, yeah. Which and I really like those two characters from the first couple of series. They're quite interesting people, but you have an opportunity there to be able to tell a story. They do have to come together at various points. That's obviously part of the plot, but you have the opportunity here to tell a story from two completely different angles if you want to. And I think the plot is batshit, as it is with all of these kind of Danish produced noir shows. If you've ever seen what was called internationally The Killing, you know that actually having any kind of consistent plot or having it make sense at the end is completely incidental. The whole point is that you just watch these moody people driving around in silly cars and then pulling guns out for no apparent reason at various points. Anyway, and they have great jumpers, great knitted jumpers. That's one of the things that you need.
I think in general, crime shows like that would be good, or films.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, because police detective is usually a very good grounds for an adventure game. You're detecting shit, and you're picking up evidence, and you're analyzing evidence. And I like the idea that you have of switching between the two characters, where one of them is overly analytical, and the other one needs to sit down and have a think to keep the room from spinning.
I mean, even if it's just an adaptation of the Clue game, sort of, which, had its own movie with Tim Curry and everything, I'm sort of thinking, the Knives Out franchise, if you're familiar with any of those two films, would be great for this.
I'm not.
So I think detective shows are... one of the reasons detective shows work, and I think we've been talking about two different types of adventure game and adaptation since we've been doing this conversation. So on the one hand, you've got stuff that works as a tight plot that involves you going out and finding things out about the world and then making a difference to that world through what you've found out. And then there's the other one where you just want to be immersed in a great world that has so much color and depth to it that you just want to spend time walking around it and learning more about it. And I think we've had the sort of the walk around and find out more about it kind of world with things like Red Dwarf and with Doctor Who and with Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And then there's this more kind of, actually there's a plot here that works really well as finding out things about the world, and maybe something that has, as is always true with these kind of detective things, where you can go in maybe different directions, where you can maybe get it wrong, as we would, as Francisco would have us do in Lamplight City, or where there can be multiple endings depending on what you find out or depending on the choices that you make.
Yeah, there's one question I had there, which was that if you adapt an existing crime drama, which is a murder mystery, and obviously that murder mystery has a resolution that has been revealed in the TV show itself, you would either have to divert from the source material pretty hard, give them a new case to solve or whatever it is, or just simply be a massive disappointment to anyone who's actually watched the show. Carrying on with the story.
I think it's true for most of the stuff that we've been speaking about, that you would need to create new stories set in the same universe. Either that, or in the case of the next example that I know you'll be bringing up, focus on the journey rather than its end. So if you adapt a novel or a film or a show or whatever, never mind that people know how it's going to end. You can pull that off if it's something like retro, something retro, something from the 90s or earlier. That's fine. Just pack it with stuff that elaborates on what you've already seen, like The Last Crusade did, because surely that would disappoint you if you'd gone in and seen the movie already.
Yeah, or would it? Because it diverts at some points from the source material. But what I really like in specifically that adaptation is, even if you have watched the movie, what you're doing is, because they elaborated on the set pieces of the movie to introduce adventure game puzzles. So, like, for instance, that whole bit in the library where he has to find X marks the spot and it's right on the floor. Instead of just climbing up the staircase and looking at the floor, it's now a complete adventure game puzzle where you have to work out, there's like several floors and you have to work out which floor it is and stuff like that. So even if you know where the story is going, you're sort of excited to get to the end bit because you already know what's coming, but the way you have to work your way through that story.
Well, that was my point. That was my point entirely.
Oh, cool. Well, I'm happy to reiterate that. I'm like a complete idiot then.
I shall say nothing.
Well, you don't have to. We already know. So I guess I could bring up my last example, and then we can just spitball for the remaining 5 minutes or so. My last example is not so much a movie. It's a movie, but it's not so much a movie that I want to see turned into an adventure game. It's one that I don't really understand why it wasn't an adventure game to begin with. And I
can tell you that because it's a Roman Polanski movie.
Right, but it didn't necessarily have to be a Roman Polanski movie. See, the movie is based on a French novel called The Club Dumas or something like that.
The Club Dumbass.
The Club Dumbass, exactly. Anyway, the movie is in the Ninth Gate, and the protagonist is referred to as a book detective. He tracks down hard-to-find books and just happens to be hired by an obscenely wealthy person who wants him to go find the Book of the Ninth Gate of Shadows, or whatever the fuck it's called, a book reportedly written by Satan himself, which, is an interesting sort of thing to have on your shelf, really. So it doesn't cackle or glow red at night, but it's are we ramping up from Wheaton to Polanski? Okay, yeah, I think we are.
Gareth is mercifully silent at this point.
Well, yeah, it's true. No. The character of Roman Polanski himself, thankfully, has nothing to do with what I want to discuss here. Anyway, Satan wrote a book. He actually, there are 3 copies of the book, and this book detective is tasked with going out and figuring out which one is the authentic one. It turns out all three of them are, spoiler, and anyway, the point of the book is you can actually open a gate to hell itself and become immortal and all this sort of shit. So there's a whole cult surrounding these books, and the dude who hired the book detective is actually completely batshit insane. So, well, if you collect books written by Satan, of course you would be kind of insane. But anyway, so the movie actually plays out like an adventure game. To be honest, there's even several scenes at the beginning, really, where the protagonist sits down and talks to people and actually says things like, "What can you tell me about this book?" It's like Gabriel Knight if Satan showed up. So it would have been a fantastic adventure game. And I think you could actually do, if you were to adapt the Ninth Gate into an adventure game, you could do the thing that Last Crusade did, where it's not so much what's going to happen at the end. You're not spoiling any big surprise, but the journey there are many opportunities to flesh out the set pieces of that movie with adventure gamey type puzzles, and I would gladly see that through to the end. So that was my final pick, The Ninth Gate, which is pretty much an adventure game in movie form anyway.
Well, I mean, anything that kind of delves into... We've been talking about crime mysteries, but certainly anything that delves into occult mysteries would also be ideal. Absolutely.
Yeah. And he's a detective, so just not a police detective.
Yeah, I was thinking of one particular Hammer horror movie, which is called The Devil Rides Out, basically where Christopher Lee has to ward off the devil, as opposed to playing the devil. But he has kind of a mirror image in the evil cult. Charles Gray playing the evil Mokata. Obviously, there are some action scenes, but I think it could work as an adventure game. There's a lot of searching for this young initiate from this club of friends who has been getting himself into some hot water with the occultists, some moving between locales and setting up various stuff for ancient rites. And I think anything that has
juicy.
An expansive lore, like it also features this, I digress a bit, but the fucking best horror movie line of all time. I know that's a tall order, but Charles Gray's character has been trying to put the spell on the good guys, and obviously he's foiled because the movie hasn't ended yet. It fails, and as he leaves, he's exceedingly polite through this whole failed hypnotizing ordeal. As he leaves, he turns towards our lead characters and says, "I shall not be back, but something will," which is just a brilliant line. To hear that in an adventure game would be worth the price of admission on its own.
That's better than "Jij gaat onti-pikken."
Marginally.
but only by a slight margin, yes.
Yeah.
You also, oh, sorry, I'm going to cut Gareth off. No, I don't want to.
No, I was just thinking about sort of the occult and religion and various other things. Again, without wanting to spoil it because it is only just coming out. But my wife dragged me to Conclave the other day, which is quite an interesting thing to watch. It's set in the Vatican, and I'm not going to talk any more about that because you probably ought to go out and see it. But it's a film that's in about 5 or 6 different languages, and of course, going out to watch that in the cinema here meant that I had to read it in Danish, which was quite the experience. But that's also a bit of a mystery where there's a cardinal that has to try and uncover various conspiracies that are going on in the Vatican, while also trying to protect his own position. And I think that would also work quite well as an adventure game. Actually, all the way through, I was thinking, actually, I can see this as an adventure. I think
that's
work.
Cool. Like a serious reboot of Hudson Hawk. Yes.
Did you guys watch Apostle? It's a Netflix horror movie with kind of... I struggle to describe the universe it takes place in, but it's about this guy who goes to solve, if I remember correctly, a murder mystery on this remote island overtaken by cultists, not unlike The Wicker Man, which might also be a good candidate for an adventure game. Not the Nicolas Cage version with the bees.
There has to be a bees Easter egg in there.
But anyway, Apostle has this cool world, which is kind of like late 1800s Silent Hill, sort of, with the further the character gets into this occult world, the more bizarre things get. It's pretty amazing.
It even has The Puzzle as the title, so obviously that would work well.
That's a good pun.
And you also mentioned at some point Lovecraft, as in most of his.
I did, yeah.
The world and the lore of surrounding, the deep horrors and all this sort of shit would make for a great adventure game. Obviously, there have been 2 Lovecraftian adventure games, Prisoner of Ice and Shadow of the Comet, which are, I suppose, decent, but not really that fondly remembered.
I'm not terribly familiar with them. I think most Lovecraft adaptations in general don't capture that interconnected thing that he had going, because Cthulhu will link with other elder gods, and there'll be a race of aliens in this story that make a reappearance in this story, maybe the focal point in one, and they just make a cameo appearance in the other one. Obviously decades before cinematic universes was a thing, he was making literary universes and rampant racism, which makes him a troublesome author to adapt. But there is some good stuff in there too.
Yeah, and absolutely. The thing about Lovecraft that I read was he came up with some of this shit and basically built the world around it. But what he did was then release that world to his friends and other authors and said, go ahead, just write some shit. A lot of these elder gods that are now famously ingrained into our culture, at least in science fiction and horror culture, were not created by Lovecraft at all. They were created by his friends who went off and wrote their own elder god stories, which is great. So he would probably not have any problem with adapting one of his stories for an adventure game. And here's an interesting thing. Those 2 games that I mentioned previously, Shadow of the Comet and Prisoner of Ice, I have to remind myself, it's not prisoners of ice. There's a singular prisoner, and he's in ice. But they did one thing right, and this is something we've talked about, is that they did not try to adapt a single story by Lovecraft or mash a few stories together like a Spanish-produced movie adaptation of a Lovecraftian story called Dagon. If you haven't seen it, I kind of advise you to see it, and also not, because it is batshit insane. But anyway, the 2 games actually went out and sort of did their own story. And I believe one of the things that Shadow of the Comet especially is fondly remembered for is that it follows the Lovecraftian rule of don't show the monster, show the madness that the monster inspires.
Yeah, that's always a good rule to live by. While you were talking, I was actually also thinking of Dracula, which is a very good example of, in my opinion, how not to do it. Because I've read the original novel a number of times, and it always makes my blood chill, even though I know what's coming. So why has that not been adapted rather than getting a series of sequel adventure games to the original story? I kind of thought of it as I don't know if you've watched the new Nosferatu yet. I implore you to do so. It's actually pretty good. But the original Dracula novel does have that multi-character thing going, and also different perspectives. It's basically formed by diaries and letters and what have you, and phonograph recordings. Transcriptions of phonograph recordings. So by the time one character realizes something, you as a reader may already be onto that trail. And I think that would be a really interesting mechanic to try to explore.
I agree. I think it would be a really good mechanic. My worry, especially with really good atmospheric horror, is kind of something that we've talked about in the past with dialogue, and why dialogue sounds so stilted in a lot of adventure games. And it's very difficult to get the pacing right, because as the writer of an adventure game, you can't control how quickly the player goes through your world. And if they get stuck at a particular point, the tension can be lost, either because it just builds up too much and then can't actually pay off, or because people miss the bits that they're supposed to be paying attention to. So while I completely agree, it'd be really interesting to see somebody try that kind of thing. The only game I can think of whose name is now escaping me, which is really, really bad, that has done a good job of keeping that tension going, and it's basically because it's a walking simulator, is the one where you're in the house in the northwest of America, and the parents have gone out.
Gone home.
Well, we ramped it up from Polanski again.
Oh shit! He
Well,
was
look.
so nice when we did the interview. It's just amazing, isn't it?
Well, we didn't work for him.
True.
Look, the point being that game, we're Whedon, Polanski. Anyway, the point being that did quite a good job of building up that tension and making that atmosphere work. But I wonder with something like Dracula, where you would need to be a little bit more of a detective going through it, I wonder whether it would be possible to get the pacing of it right in order to really have that payoff. I mean, maybe it is, and I'm not.
I was giggling before because I was thinking, playing as Jonathan Harker, you walk up to Dracula. Can you tell me what I'm supposed to do again? I told you, give me contract for Carfax Abbey.
Yeah, but dude, it's the same nonsense like in the 7th Guest and the 11th Hour. It's like what does the house actually want? All Stoff does is just wander around and cackle to himself and make enigmatic things. And oh god,
it's a good life. Or it's a good afterlife.
Well, yeah, I suppose it was. But interestingly, this actually quite nicely segues into a future episode we've been talking about doing, which is, can you do spooky horror shit in an adventure game setting where, as Gareth says, the pacing of which is largely up to the player and is largely non-threatening. Gone Home was a fantastic example because I still love that game to bits because, as you say, there is this underpinning tension of you walking around an empty house and people, you find note clippings that start talking about fucking ghosts and shit. And you go, what the hell is going on here? And it turns, and by the end, it completely circumvents that expectation, which is fantastic. Not going to spoil it.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but I was absolutely convinced it was going one way. I was absolutely dreading it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
The way that it ends is not how you expect it to end.
No, and it tells an emotional story that actually really, really works emotionally. Another thing that's really hard to get across in point and click adventuring, or at least it seems like people are really struggling with the idea. So one future episode we've been talking about is it possible to make like proper horror in adventure games, not just have a spooky underpinning or a campy horror like Harvester, Phantasmagoria, that kind of shit, but I'd like really proper stay with you, give you nightmares type of horror. Spoiler, my argument is no. That's what survival horror games are for. That's what your Silent Hills and Project Zeros are for.
Great. Thanks, Trolls. Now you've just completely ruined... No, I'm going to have to come up with another idea now. Jeez.
I got nightmares from King Quest V.
Yeah, but for entirely different reasons, I would imagine.
Probably. I mean, you can do jump scares. That's the easy way out. Obviously, I'm inclined to agree with you, but with regards to a novel like Dracula, I would argue that you don't need jump scares or absolute nightmarish horror. You just need the oh my god, there's something very very wrong, and even though I know exactly what it is, it has me captured. That's the vibe you need.
Absolutely. And I'm really tempted to just go down this rabbit hole now because I have so much I want to talk about with regards to horror. But we're going to save that for another time. In fact, we are out of time, which is a shame, really, because we would love to hear from anyone who has ideas for something out there that has not been adapted into an adventure game, which would... Shit, I completely forgot to bring up The Thing. I even wrote a fucking design document for an adventure game based on The Thing, like the John Carpenter.
I was surprised you didn't bring that up.
The Thing would work really well.
Yeah. We'll have to... Maybe we can shoehorn that into the horror episode or something.
Well, don't reveal all the design because John Carpenter likes to get high and play video games, and he might enjoy the idea.
Well, fuck, if he does, he's welcome to run with it.
I mean, he has... I was actually thinking prior to this episode, I had watched Prince of Darkness not that terribly long ago, and I thought, would that make... Nah, I don't think so, and it's probably partly because of that thing you mentioned. Also, the addition of several action scenes towards the end, because many horror films do that. You need to get to the climax and monsters start appearing, stuff like that. How does that translate well into an adventure game? It doesn't.
Now, Gabriel Knight even falls prey to that in the second one, where you have to run around the fucking basement and shove Von Glauer into the furnace and shit like that. Yeah, you don't want to see. That's why the Ninth Gate will work really well, because there is no boss fight at the end.
No, it's very anticlimactic, and in the good sense.
Yeah, in that sense, it's sort of anticlimactic, and yet the ending is just so. It's shit. I really shouldn't spoil it, but it really. First of all, it's enigmatic. It leaves you. It's one of those "what happened next" kind of endings where you just sort of go, "What the fuck?" And it also has titties. So
it's basically the ending that people seem to be afraid of now. You know, people aren't doing Monkey Island 2 or The Ninth Gate or the Thing type endings anymore, because you'll have nerds screaming, "There were multiple plot holes," you know, if their Marvel shit doesn't line up exactly perpendicular to the next fucking film in the franchise.
Ooh, blood pressure.
The Thing has dead Norwegians as well, which, going back to an earlier conversation about Scandinavian...
Yeah, and speaking of spoilers, that guy spoils the entire movie within the first 2 minutes.
Oh, it's so great. Don't bring the dog in. It's an alien. Shoot. Okay.
Se där för helvete, jag kommer väck.
Yeah. See, okay, so really, really briefly, like you say, Dead Norwegians. The first movie was about the American outpost. The second movie, they did sort of a prequel thing, which was also called The Thing, which, rocky start and all that. But that told the story of what happened to the Norwegian camp where the Thing actually came from. And there was mention of a Russian camp. So that's where I set my idea for the adventure game.
It's a bit out of line with the times, though.
No, it isn't. Oh, you mean like the times, like the zeitgeist?
Well, the zeitgeist is pretty close to the zeitgeist you had when the Thing was made.
I suppose so. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time. I'm very sorry. We're trying to keep these at around an hour, and we don't have James Spanos rocking up out of the blue 5 minutes before we're supposed to end the. James, we love you. So we should probably end the proceedings here, but thank you guys so much.
One thing we should do, along with soliciting comments on Facebook, YouTube, what have you, which we're very eager to read, is outline our plans for the future, because we have been gone a while and it almost feels like another clean break for, reasons that we didn't plan for.
We're gone like for a month and a half and we all start having like withdrawal symptoms.
Basically.
Oh, well, I thought you were going to go ahead and outline those plans. I can do it.
No, you're usually better at it. I just want to prod you and, talk about the stuff I want you to talk about, trolls.
I will. All right. And I'll keep doing it in this voice. Now, so we have a number of guests who are interested in coming back on the show, and some new guests who we would like to see on the show. And we've been talking to a bunch of people who would be very interesting guests. So we're going to have some more guest episodes in the future, which I just going around in circles here, really.
I mean, the thing is, we weren't planning on those. We were actually planning to try to avoid those because it makes scheduling easier. Then we did a couple of them and found ourselves having a great time. And now we're kind of like, okay, well, if people want to subject themselves to this, let them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the good old days. It's brought a lot of that back. And also 2025 looks like one of those years where a lot of our old friends are going to be releasing new stuff. And it's going to be fun to just have a chat with them, give them an opportunity to try and part you, listener, with your money, but also maybe explain where they're coming from and why they got into what they're doing.
Oh, yes. And the one thing that we are really keen to keep doing is not to delve into, as a mistake we have made in the past, is to delve into a singular experience, like having people on who might, or just really there to plug their game sort of things. We're going to keep things high concept. So even if we bring on a guest who, excuse me, has a game coming out.
This is why we had a hiatus. We spent some time. You can mute your microphone,
Yeah, but I'm not going to.
We all spent time dying for various reasons over Christmas.
Yeah, there was that as well. Anyway, so we're going to keep things a bit high concept. So if we have a guest on who has a new game coming out, we're not going to be talking about that game specifically. We're going to do what we did with Julia and Kevin and Phil in the episode about the Parser games. They all had games, particularly Julia, who just come out with the Crimson Diamond. But we weren't talking about the Crimson Diamond. We were talking about Parser games. So For instance, we're talking about our good friend Dave Gilbert, who has expressed interest in coming back on the show for reasons I cannot fathom.
Yeah, he needs better quality control.
He absolutely does. But he has a new game coming out, and he's interested in talking about that. But we've been prodding him to take the discussion in sort of a high-level concept, so we can talk about his game, and he can use his game as an example, but the topic is going to be something that's more sort of generalized. And that's the approach we're going to take with all the guests that we have on the show in the future. Other than that, we have an RSS feed now.
Yes,
Yay!
and our podcast is currently live on Apple Podcasts, possibly with other platforms coming, I believe.
Yeah, someone has to get a Spotify account and upload this shit
No,
there. But...
I'm not doing it. If you, dear listener, has a Spotify account,
yes, please.
you want to hold our podcast to ransom? Then
what could go wrong?
What could absolutely go wrong?
Well, you had the podcast held to ransom by somebody on the bloody podcast, and you managed to fuck it up. So, you know.
Yeah, we still don't have a website.
No. So we're not really sure how to share this RSS feed. I'll share it on my socials, but obviously we closed down our Twitter account, but we opened one on Blue Sky. So you can go follow that. I think it's at Backseat Designers at bsky.app. I don't remember. Just search for Backseat Designers. We're there. And we will, of course, be posting new episodes there and also put the RSS link in our profile. So I guess that's something. And like Fred said, you can search for it on Apple Podcasts and possibly other avenues as well. Still don't have a website, but at this point, do we really need one? I suppose we don't really.
It's an existential question.
Yeah, that's the next. That's really all I've got. Did you have anything else in mind?
No.
All right, cool. So, just a rundown. We got guests coming in the future. We've got an RSS feed, so you can subscribe to this and actually listen to it on the go instead of having to go to my fucking YouTube page. And we're not getting a website. Fuck it. And also, we're on Blue Sky now, so fuck Twitter. That's pretty much it. So, say goodbye, Frederick.
Bye.
Say goodbye, Professor Plummer.
Ja, Auntie Fiesen.
Leckert. Fucking hell, man. Yeah, good night. It's a good night for me. Goodbye.
No, der leckert. Ja, Auntie Fiesen.